There we go. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Teaching and Supervision of Human Trafficking and Counselor Education Programs. For those of you that are joining us, I hope that you're coming to us from a great, warm and sunny location. I'm all the way down in Miami, so I just thought I would, rub that in somebody's face for a few minutes. But today I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I know we have an amazing crew here, and I am just thrilled to be able to kind of come alongside them. Team, I'll just let you guys take it and we'll go from there. And if you need any help, I'll be jumping in the chat or something.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for being here. We are excited to kind of continue the conversation that some of us were just having on trauma-informed work and programs the last couple of hours. And we're going to talk a little bit more about doing this in the scope of human trafficking within counselor education programs. So if we want to do a really quick round of introductions, my name is Dr. Eldridge or Dr. E, and I'm faculty here at the Chicago School in the Counselor Education Department, and I work in Denver, Colorado, in a private practice as well.
My name is Dr. Susan Foster. I am the department chair and faculty member for the Counselor Education Department here at the Chicago School online campus. I also have a private practice. I am about 30 minutes north of New Orleans, Louisiana. Kevin?
My name is Kevin Skiles. I am a student interning here through the Chicago School, and I am at 2 private practices currently for my internship.
Busy.
And Michael is trying to find his way in.
Michael will be here soon. All right. Well, our focus for today is to, gosh, I need to move this taskbar so I can what I'm saying is to talk about the challenges that are faced from both the student or the learner point of view, the instructional point of view, and also the supervision point of view when we are learning and working with folks who have gone through human trafficking. So we're going to be talking about trauma-informed teaching strategies, and we're also going to be talking about trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive supervision for these cases as well. So some of the material that we'll talk about, if we might give case examples, or we might talk about, different challenges and topics that can certainly be difficult to hear or to reflect upon. So please do know that we aren't offended if you need to step away, or if if you had your video on, you need to turn it off. We encourage self-care as we go through this. Okay, so here's our trifecta, and I think, Kevin, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so we have, I read left to right and top to bottom typically, so I'll start with learners, which really isn't at the top. The onus is really on the learner, and not just to rely on what's being taught within the program, but to do the research ourselves. Resources are available not only through governmental agencies, but through multiple higher education organizations that have smaller groups as well, who also focus additional attention and spotlight human trafficking to increase awareness and education. And then moving on to educators, we have providing current research in various formats, from peer-reviewed articles and podcasts to books and videos, addressing the curriculum from a worldview versus a Western or US only view, which research suggests may limit credibility due to other views of those in the US, and taking into account that the US is relatively young in its research into human trafficking. Presenting information from a human rights point of view, knowing that the numbers of those being trafficked are not accurately represented of actual numbers. Additionally, there should also be some understanding that educators themselves are still being educated as they are instructing students. From the supervision side, it's the supervisor awareness to a counselor's experience of vicarious trauma with human trafficking clients, and supervisor to address not only the supervisee feelings related to the topic, but how the supervisee reacts to the client. Supervisors should be able to provide a safe space for supervisees to be vulnerable without judgment, and provide guidance, a calming presence, and then the reiteration of self-care. And then we have learning about, I know Michael was gonna say something about,
And I saw people come in, so
yeah, there he is. The actual definition, which he was gonna do back on slide 4.
Michael, you're on mute.
Can you hear me okay?
There you are. Great.
Great, thank you. You know, I wanted to just quickly go over what we mean by when we say not understanding. And I wanted to go over the definition or a definition, because there are several definitions. You have federal definitions by different agencies. You even have international definitions of what human trafficking is. For example, according to the UN, the UN's definition, United Nations, human trafficking is the recruitment and transportation, transfer, harboring of or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. That's for men, women, children of all ages, all backgrounds. Human trafficking involves the use of force or coercion, fraud, also any type of labor or commercial sex act. Human trafficking is an ill that's worldwide. Human trafficking is also called a hidden crime. The victims are sometimes afraid to come forth and seek help. So when you look at our slide presentation here, we're looking at the frequency that is happening, the realities, and the media sensationalism. Sometimes we hear about it in the media. It's there for a day or two, then it's gone. So we don't want to get caught up in the sense that the media isn't talking about it, that it's not happening, because it is happening. It's a national event, it's an international event. Most people think that human trafficking only happens sometimes, but in reality, it happens every day. And the reality involves all of us. It's a huge problem, it's an international problem, and it needs attention. It's not frequently talked about. If no one talks about it, then no conversations will lead to the awareness, education, or solutions. Lack of exposure in curriculums. We need more focus in school programs and courses for awareness. We need more law enforcement to be involved and to be aware and to be mindful of those things to detect human trafficking and to help to counter it. Just think of the small police departments where there's not much awareness of human trafficking. And if police officers, law enforcement, if they have a better knowledge and awareness of it, they will notice that they will see more leads and more things that will lead to investigations about human trafficking. The heaviness of the topic. Remember, as counselors, self-care before, during, and after is need to be adhered to. The topics are very heavy. They're very sad. Again, this is an international event. Sometimes you may have, or you may know of people who are not able to even speak the language. How will you network? How would you connect with these people that don't speak the language? People that don't have resources are subject to human trafficking. We want to look at increasing the experiences of counselors' knowledge and proficiency through classes, conferences, meetings, webinars, workshops, knowing your local and state, even tribal and federal initiatives to get involved. You add a certain value in understanding of people, understanding of the mental health problems and issues that people have when they're trafficked. And you're not, as counselors, you're not foreign to these things, because these things involve things like depression, anxiety, and other problems such as anger. So what to do when self-care is out of reach? Get help. Talk about it. Talk about your experiences. Of course, we're keeping the clients in mind. We're not exposing their names and things such as that, but we want you to talk about it. We want you to get help, seek a counselors. Counselors need counselors. understanding the negative emotions that can interfere with the learning when you are in a predicament or in a situation when it comes to human trafficking. Next slide.
Okay, I think this one is Dr. Foster.
It's me, teaching about human trafficking. So let's talk about that. So there are challenges, but they're not just content challenges. There are challenges with content and process, and we'll break those down and look at both of those things. And so from a purely logistical point of view, how do we fit in teaching about human trafficking in our curriculum? Do we make it elective? Do we make it as part of a required trauma course? For those of you who are educators on the call, you know that there's so much that we have to pack into what is required curriculum. And some states have specific electives that need to be taken, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for us to teach trauma-informed courses that are, specific electives. So what tends to happen at times then is that human trafficking becomes the tagline in a class. And it is just as quickly as it's talked about, as Michael talked about in the news, just as quickly as it's talked about in the curriculum, it's not. And so we need to think about how can we effectively fit it into a trauma-informed curriculum. We also need to think about styles of teaching and the need to really understand that if we're going to teach about human trafficking, it has to come from a trauma-informed perspective. As Dr. E mentioned, we just came from another presentation where we were talking about trauma-informed decision-making, trauma-informed care, trauma-informed consultation. And not every individual is comfortable talking or teaching around the topic of human trafficking. And so thinking about what is my specific teaching style? Have I done my own work around whether or not I believe that it's been sensationalized? Do I sensationalize the topic? What do I really think in terms of teaching human trafficking? Am I ready? Do I feel confident teaching around the topic? Have I considered the assignments? In graduate school, I bet if I asked for a show of hands, how many of us remember doing a reflective assignment? I know our students are going to be like yesterday. But for everyone else on the call that may be teaching it, when was the last time you did something that was non-reflective in a graduate mental health program? It is it's kind of the assignment of choice for many programs, and by design. It's important that our students are extremely self-reflective and they understand where they're positioned on a particular topic. That could be re-traumatizing to someone who has experienced human trafficking, and so or any trauma in general. And so thinking about how we will teach and assess competency, that's an important consideration. Is the system in which you are currently educating, is it built to do this kind of work? Instructor competency, again, if we're requiring students self-disclose and then that leads us to questions, what happens if a student says, Dr. E, I'm opting out of doing this assignment? Are we competent enough as individuals to understand why that may be, and have we offered alternatives? And so several challenges that exist just purely on the content side of what does delivery of this information look like. Mm-hmm. Dr. E, you can advance the slide. Then we have process-related concerns. Student safety, I mentioned the traumatization before, whether it's primary or secondary vicarious trauma. Students run the risk of being traumatized when they are exposed to information such as human trafficking. For some people, it may be a re-traumatization. And, There's also the sense that students will, when they're made to share their story with disclosure assignments and whatever else the case may be, they lose all sense of anonymity and confidentiality, not just with you as their instructor, but among their peer group as well. And so that's something we have to think about in terms of process. Again, there's also the idea of going back to something that Michael said around the sensationalization around it. This is someone, whether it's someone in your section or your provided, Dr. E and I have both worked with individuals who've been trafficked. There, we run the risk of, depending on how we present this information, of sensationalizing the information and removing the ability for it to be a pure learning experience and creating a traumatic experience for our students. And so then also for a student who is required to take this class, has their own experience, what is the impact on their academic performance when they cannot do it? Should we make them have to do it? And then there are your personal reactions as an instructor to a student's story. And so there's no real clean way necessarily to assess what this looks like. So many challenges exist in terms of how we, from a content and process related place, place this in the curriculum and hold space for what this might look like for students.
And Dr. Foster, you got me thinking when you're talking about like, where do we fit it in the curriculum? Like, so often we are trying to fit it into the trauma course, whether it's a required or an elective course, but that is really not a trauma-informed perspective. We need to understand that experience of human trafficking and the impact of trauma will show up in every course. You were talking about the genogram assignment, which of course we have in our program. And consider, it's not a trauma course, but if you consider a survivor of familial trafficking being asked to do a genogram, that could be hugely traumatizing. And so making sure that we're thinking even beyond the trauma class and saying like, how might it show up and how could we make sure these courses aren't re-traumatizing or insensitive or missing the whole reality of how pervasive trafficking is, and that our students, not only will they be working with trafficking survivors, but many of them identify as trafficking survivors.
And it's, it's not as simple as here is a discussion post on human trafficking. It's so much more pervasive than that, and so much more elusive and covert. I'm thinking about, as you said that, I'm thinking about, hurry up, Susan, think of 5 places in which it might show up. How quick can you do that? And I came up with 10 while you were talking. The substance use class, the human growth and development class, the introduction and the ethics class,
diagnosis,
psychopathology,
culture,
marriage and
and
family.
basically every course in a master's curriculum is relevant to this topic.
Absolutely it is.
Good. Yeah.
And so while you may say, faculty, I'm proposing that we do this discussion and we can watch to make sure that everyone is okay with this discussion. But are we really, do we have our trauma-informed hat on, and are we recognizing that this is not a siloed event? There's the ability for someone to be victimized, re-victimized, re-traumatized, all of those things, regardless of the academic setting in which we find ourselves.
Exactly. Not an easy process. I think this one me, I think.
This is you.
So thinking about, we've been kind of talking about our specifics in a program, but just in a general way that we talk about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed consultation. Of course, we also have trauma-informed teaching principles. So throughout the entire curriculum, not just in a trauma class, we want to understand that safety is first and foremost. So understanding where, like what assignments, what interactions, what dynamics might be in place in a class or curriculum or an entire program that might challenge safety of student learning. We need to recognize that even coming from the trauma-informed care principles, that trauma is pervasive. It's really embedded in all of our systems. It's everywhere. And so not assuming that our students don't have trauma histories. Every student is going to come in with their own history, their own experience. And something we were talking about in our last conversation was that trauma isn't comparative. So you don't want to be saying, okay, well, Kevin, you shared this history with me, but Michael shared this history and Michael's is really worse. So I need to make sure that I'm being trauma informed with Michael, but not Kevin. Like we have to just make sure that we are treating each student as an individual with their own histories. We also have to be aware of the risk of exploitation. So of course there's a power dynamic amongst faculty, administration, and students. So if we are somehow abusing that power dynamic or even oblivious to it, that can be re-traumatizing and re-exploitative for our student survivors, especially. And that sometimes symptom reoccurrence is going to happen throughout the course of a program like this, especially with those assignments we were just talking about that are self-exploration, and keeping our eyes open to how that might manifest for students. Does that mean a student who normally is very engaged has now been missing for a week? And instead of saying, well, gosh, that student is just slacking off, or I can't believe they wouldn't turn in their assignments, saying, let me check in. Let me, be compassionate and person-centered and see if there's anything that they need. Being prepared to make referrals to either university or local counseling services. So this also goes to an ethical boundary. Even though we are all counselors, we are working in the role of educator. So it's inappropriate for us to then move into, hey, you've been missing your assignments for a week. Why don't we schedule a session and tell me what's going on? Completely unethical, right? But we also want to have those resources and referral opportunities at our fingertips in case the student would benefit from that. Knowing that trauma and trauma responses impact academic performance, even if it's not a trauma class. So even just thinking about basic trauma neurobiology and parts of our brains that are online when we are feeling overwhelmed with stress. They're not the parts of our brains that help us take in information and think critically and use our executive functioning. That's not where we're at in our nervous system if we're feeling triggered or overwhelmed. We need to be informed about trauma in general, about secondary trauma, and about re-traumatization, both for our students and for faculty and administration. And same goes for transference and countertransference reactions. So again, knowing like, is something getting triggered in me as the faculty with this student, and what might that be? And let me make sure that I'm giving myself room to pause, to check in with what is coming up for me. What do I know about this student's experience, and how can I approach them in an ethical manner that doesn't exploit that power differential as well. And then also finally, checking our assumption that trauma is good. So this comes from this article speaks to how as counselors, we really value aha moments. We really value self-awareness. We were talking about like the self-exploration assignments that can really help counselors in training get to know themselves more. But that doesn't mean that we force students into an assignment or an activity where they get down to the nitty-gritty, so to speak, and think that that's like, oh, good, you really connected with some deep stuff there. That doesn't mean that it's good. Again, understanding like what does the student need, what might be re-traumatizing, and making sure that they have choice in how they complete an assignment that might be traumatizing.
And Dr. E, that just brought something up for me. In our previous presentation, we were talking about SAMHSA's 6 criteria of being trauma informed. And one of them is choice and voice, right? And so recognizing that I am not the decider of what is good when it comes to someone processing their trauma. That is not my responsibility, not as a counselor or an educator. And so if I wouldn't do it when I was a counselor, why would I do it as an educator? Recognizing again that one of those very crucial 6 key components is the idea of agency.
Mhm. Yep, exactly. Exactly. So this is exactly what you were just saying, Dr. Foster. So being trauma informed, balancing self-disclosure, increasing choice, balancing exposure and intensity with empathy and compassion. When we think about the way we deliver a course, we want to set it up with creating basically a safe space. And this is true for in-person teaching as well as online teaching. So whether it's the first assignment or whether it's the way the instructor welcomes everybody into the class and shows that they're present and shows that they are safe and kind. And then making sure that that continues throughout the course. So, as we go into the kind of the meat of the curriculum, and then at the end of when everyone might be exhausted and fatigued, and this is heavy information, making sure that we have this thread moving through the assignments and the curriculum that is a place of empathy, attunement, compassion from the instructor. And we also talked about, we're not the counselor, but we're also, this final point, not a voyeur. As counselor educators, we do get very private glimpses into our students' lives and our students' history, whether that's through an assignment or through a conversation or, through the challenges that they go through in the course of a program. And we need to treat that with respect and honor. And not just, again, to the sensationalized, like, ooh, that was so interesting. Hey, Dr. Foster, did you know, blah, blah, blah. That's totally inappropriate and not trauma informed at all. So we need to monitor any falters, I guess, that happen there. And just remember that it is an honor and a privilege to be in these roles. And we need to treat everybody with that respect.
From what we're doing, at least within the Chicago School, we have in class and out of class. So in class, we're doing things like activities, learning materials, and assignments. And then, as was explained to me just earlier today, energy bubbles, which Dr. E could put words to better than I can, but I'll try. It's just kind of creating that invisible, I don't want to call it a force field, somewhat semi-permeable, I guess, in terms of just having something around us that we can be present in that space and not take on what is coming in our direction. And then learning materials, keeping current, diverse, multiple resources, learning material options, increasing awareness through intersectional education, cultural humility, cultural awareness. And as we've been saying, trauma-informed approach, including ethical considerations and others as well. And then outside of class, several of us here, actually, Michael and I are on the board for the Empower, which is the human trafficking special interest group. So we have that as a resource that is available to students across all the campuses here, not available outside of TCSPP as of yet, but we are certainly looking at that. And then which creates opportunities for training, opportunities to present like this, and then outside trainings and potential to reach out into communities and educate and become more aware and create awareness as well.
Mm-hmm. And I really want to unpack the interest group a little bit more, because Kevin and Michael, you have been really spearheading this very unique group that we've been working on for over a year, and this year we got it officially recognized, and we got a strategic mission statement. And I have to say that as a faculty advisor for that program, even though it's not maybe open to people outside of Chicago School, it certainly can be a model and a collaborator with other schools or programs, because the energy that you all bring as student leaders there you've been able to say, this is what we don't know. This is what we need to know. This is beyond what we get in the course room that maybe can't get placed into the curriculum, because of course there's so much to this topic. And saying, hey, I have this contact in the Detroit Police Department. I have this contact in DC with the Blue Campaign. Let's bring in speakers. Let's do outreach to our program. And what some really cool things that are coming from it, maybe from Michael, your idea, maybe a micro course or a credentialing that is in addition to the curriculum, but that becomes an option for both students and faculty. So if we're knowing like we can't fit this into the core curriculum or the coursework entirely, that doesn't mean we don't learn it. We sort of figure out, how can we learn it? How can we bring this to our community, and share our resources and expertise and passion. So it's really a wonderful program that that Kevin and Michael, you're really spearheading. So I don't know if you all want to say anything from your perspectives as that's launching, but I think it's pretty
So
cool.
Michael clicked off mute.
I'm really proud of Empower, and Empower is eliminating human trafficking through prevention, outreach, willpower, education, and research. So that is our Empower. When the group, the idea first started, we had a million ideas, and we had to try to hone them in to come up with this group and to become an official student group. I think a lot of time and energy went in it, but the demand, the need for such an event or such group really exists, nationwide, worldwide. I'm hoping that, we could have other schools to mimic what we did and to build their group. And then later on, we can all connect and we have a network in academia so that we can start to share information. My dream is to get representation on Capitol Hill, to have influence, to be advisors to other organizations as well. So again, I'm really proud of the group. I'm really proud of the leadership that we have and the trust that we have from our faculty at the Chicago School. Thank you.
I would only add too that there are only a handful of higher education organizations that are actually doing something outside of their schools in terms of forming special interest groups like this. University of Minnesota, I know, is one, and then Arizona State University is the other that have supported programs that I have actually spoken with both and collaborated with on a couple of occasions just to get additional resources that we can bring into our group so that we can get more eyes and ears on that information.
All right. Thank you both for sharing a little bit more about that.
This was also me. I'm not sure where I was supposed to go with this other than everything we've been talking about is obviously just super huge and heavy stuff, which brings us to this next, just take a breath moment.
And we can, this sort of models what we try to do in our courses too, of like, all right, we're at the midpoint. We're all buried in these topics and this is hard. Like, let's do a self-care check-in or just take a breath. Look at the cute animals. All right. This is Dr. Foster, I think.
We're
Having trouble taking myself off mute.
Is this, I don't want to take it away from.
No, I think this is Michael. I don't think
This
this
Oh,
is-
Michael, I apologize. I apologize.
There's no worries at all. For this slide, the safety and security of all of the primary requirements for a therapeutic environment, of course, is the Therapeutic Alliance and our oath to the ACA Code of Ethics. We want to be accepting and validating. We want to keep our boundaries, set boundaries, as well as understand, be clear and consistent for both ourselves as counselors and our clients. Know our professional limitations. Again, get help when needed. Seek advice, seek supervisoryship, because we can't do it by ourselves. This is all complex. Human trafficking is a very complex network. It actually has a business model. When there are events such as Olympics, whether it's winter or summer, whether it's a World Cup, we can expect to see more human trafficking. Events that we've had recently, such as the drawback from Afghanistan, the war in Ukraine, and even the ending of Title 42, whenever there is an influx of refugees, asylum seekers, we can expect to see more human trafficking because these people are subject to the predators that are out there who are going to prey on them to try to use forms of, I call it psychological trickery or psychological warfare, even try to get them in position so that they're forced to submit to the predators and what they demand of them. We want to be authentic. We want to be honest. We want to be open. We don't want to lose those people that have been trafficked. We want to help them to understand that we care, and it's an honest care, so that we can seek help for them. Remember, we have to be safe. These people are often followed as just as any of us could be. We want to be safe for even ourselves, and we want to be conscious of our surroundings. We want to be consistent. We want to make sure that we keep our focus. Especially, I really want to push safety. I work for the Department of Homeland Security, and oftentimes what we're finding is that the victims don't want to talk because they want to keep everyone around them safe, such as their family. So if they get involved with a clinician, they want to keep, an awareness, and they want to think about everyone that they come in contact is subject to be a part of this world and that they live in. There's no hidden rules. So stay safe, stay conscious, fortify the therapeutic alliance, and help as many survivors as you can. This is a subject that is very dear to my heart. I was once working for the US State Department, and I thought that I knew so much about this subject. And it turns out I had a colleague that I traveled around the world with that was involved in human trafficking. And it just blew me away when I was exposed to the truth of it. So this can happen to anyone, anywhere, a witness. This can happen to you as a witness anywhere you go. So we want to be mindful. We want to be resilient. We want to be vigilant. But most importantly, we want to show that we care to help the survivors so that they can live a healthier and better life, because that's what we're here for. Next slide.
So as we've talked about, Michael and Kevin are both passionate, and they are finishing up their degrees, which makes us happy and sad all in the same space, guys. But what that does is they'll be moving on to the next chapter in their career, and they'll be under supervision for licensure. And, Michael, I think you made a very poignant and elegant plea for what it means to do this kind of work. It's challenging, it's taxing, it requires supervision. While again, and Dr. E did a great job of talking about the difference between supervision and consultation. As licensed professionals, we consult all the time around human trafficking. As supervisors, that might look a little different. And if you're going to have supervisees that do this kind of work, we need to understand the challenges of what that might look like. And so it might come with balancing what we know versus what we don't. Again, as Michael said, there is trauma theory out there. We can know what theory tells us, but it's such a complex, intricate, personal, and deep subject for each survivor. There's so much that we don't know. And so as a supervisee, we have to be willing to insert ourselves into squarely learning about it. And also being really objective in our self-assessment and being able to say to our supervisees, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. So it may require that you have supervision of supervision. Inherent in the idea of human trafficking is power and privilege. Dr. E and I talk about this a lot. We listen to some podcasts and some other things. We have a Friday ritual that I really wish wasn't on Fridays. It just seems to happen on Fridays. Shira will send the other a story around someone who has been trafficked that has made, as Michael said, the sensational news. And so inherent in every one of those stories is the idea of power and privilege. Well, just by virtue of being a counselor, being a supervisor, there's power and privilege that come with that. So I did want to say something about one of the things Michael said on the previous slide, which is that's why there are no hidden rules. And, because there is so much power and privilege that goes along with human trafficking. The same has to be said for supervision. We have to have cultural competence. We have to have the awareness of power and privilege. There has to be no hidden agenda. Our supervisee must understand the rules. There has to be trust there for our supervisees to talk to us about what is really going on when they encounter what it means to work with someone who's been trafficked. We also need to understand and recognize when our supervisees come to us and there are clearly defense mechanisms. The trauma-informed supervisor says, I wonder what's going on with my supervisee. I wonder if my supervisee is aware of what is happening here, versus, you are in a serious state of denial, Dr. E, and, I don't, maybe I need to talk to your agency about pulling you off this case. That's not the answer. The answer is really understanding where our supervisees are coming from, and the level of transference and countertransference that may be associated with that. You'll recognize that a lot of this sounds very parallel process, and that's because it really can be. We also need to have really good boundaries with our supervisees, because just as Dr. E talked about, we are not our students' therapists, we are not our supervisees' therapists either. But we have to be willing to have that conversation, should it need to be had, that, through this assessment and through our processing of your work, you've got some additional work we need to do around this, and what is that going to look like for you? The idea of internalized disempowerment, lack of access, lack of connection. I live in Louisiana. Dr. E lives in Denver. She is who I consult with. If I just said, I'll just find somebody in my local area, I might be looking for a little while for somebody in my local area to consult with. And so, this is very taxing and difficult work. Not everyone does it. So not everyone can supervise around it. I do want to tell one on myself, because as Dr. E says, we can learn a lot about what's not working for us. And so when I first got into working with human trafficking, it happened quite by accident. I was working with a client who came in for substance use issues, and sometime over our time, it was about 6 months in working with each other, she said, I feel like I can trust you enough to tell you this. And true doorknob confessional, it was about 5 minutes left in the end of the session. And immediately I thought, I've been doing this for so long. I've never encountered this. I don't know how to work with this. I don't know how to do this. I've just got to refer her to somebody else. And then I thought to myself, so you can't just refer her to somebody else. You have an established relationship with this person. You need to get yourself some consultation, because I was licensed at the time, some consultation around this immediately. And so the recognition that no matter where you are in your journey of working with trafficking, you may need supervision or consultation. I've done this work. Dr. E has done this work. I still need consultation around doing this work. And so my other soapbox moment here would be, don't stop until you find the support that you need. Don't stop until you find it. I'm going to do a quick poll question. I promise it'll just be a little question, Dr. E. How many beds do you think there are in my area, the state of Louisiana, for individuals who identify as male who have been trafficked? How many beds are there? Dr. E, you can't answer. You know the answer already. How many beds for someone who is in need of services, residential, long-term services? How many beds are there? Yeah, we'll go NOLA. We'll go NOLA. Michael says 0. Joey says 10. Emily says 0. We could stop there. The answer is 0 in the whole state of Louisiana. And so that speaks to how far we as a state, we as a country, we as a world have to go around understanding and supporting human trafficking victims and survivors. So don't stop until you find the support you need. Don't stop. Don't believe that it's just going to be there for you because you're doing the work. I'm dating myself by saying this. There's this movie called Field of Dreams. And in the movie, they say, if you build it, they will come. You will have to build the network you need to be able to do this work. And I promise I'm going to stop now, Dr. E.
No, all of that is such good stuff, because even, you know, for the multidisciplinary, like, you have to build it, you have to reach outside of your fellow counselors that, you know, or even reach outside the counseling profession and say, like, I need to talk with a district attorney. I need to talk with housing assistants. I need to talk with medical professionals who are trauma informed. And so we really do have to stretch ourselves to build those interdisciplinary relationships and consultation. So just continuing and kind of finishing up with the supervision and consultation models, making sure that we are using, if we are the ones providing it, and if we're the ones seeking it, looking for a trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive supervision approach. So the key pieces of these approaches are the goal to increase the counselor's knowledge of trauma theory, and when working with human trafficking cases, increasing the awareness of that as a unique feature of trauma or experience of trauma. The supervisory alliance is just critical, because this is where your supervisees are going to say, I think I might have messed up. And if you haven't cultivated a safe and welcoming, non-judgmental relationship, your supervisees are not going to let you know when they mess up, and they will be messing up, because we all do, especially when we're learning something so new and complex. So we want a relationship that promotes the ability to process not just the client material, but also the counselor's material. So it is important in these relationships to be able to talk with the supervisee about their own history. And again, walking that boundaried line of, I'm not becoming your counselor here, but your history influences the way you work with these clients. So let's talk about what is part of your experience that may likely come up, that might inform, that might be triggered or activated. And so you have to have that relationship that allows for that. That allows us to increase both the supervisee and the supervisor's self-awareness. It helps to destigmatize the reactions that any counselor will have to doing this type of work. Of course, we're going to have our own trauma responses, or counter trauma, counter transference responses, vicarious trauma. So knowing what we can expect and how to resource ourselves when that happens. and it encourages the collaboration versus the isolation. Because so often in these cases when it's like, oh, I guess I should have known that. I took a trauma class. How come I don't know this? I bet all my peers know it. I don't want to ask because I don't want to look dumb. And what that does is that perpetuates the isolation. So if we can cultivate a safe supervisory relationship, our supervisees can ask anything. Like I said, we want to be able to monitor and address both vicarious trauma and the countertransference reactions. So with vicarious trauma, a relational oriented supervision, like what I've been talking about, is actually associated with lower levels of vulnerability to that vicarious trauma. This is actually the topic of my dissertation as well. This is not it that's cited there, but I found the same thing. The people who were getting specifically complex trauma sensitive supervision and working with complex trauma cases had higher counselor self-efficacy. So this belief that I can do this, and lower levels of vicarious trauma, which what does that turn into? It means we can last in the profession. It means we can reach more clients. It means we can have a larger impact on our communities. And then also the countertransference reactions. I know we're running out of time here, so just know that it's, there are some specific countertransference reactions for working with complex trauma like human trafficking that are extremely common. So as the supervisor, knowing what those are so that when they're happening, with your supervisee, you can say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Let's check this out. This is actually normal. Let's unpack it together. And then, of course, we always need to examine cultural influences, cultural intersections between supervisee and client, and between client and us and supervisee. This whole mix of all of us in the formula. Okay, so we kind of sped through that at the end, but what questions, comments, thoughts does anybody have? And you're welcome to come off of mute. You're welcome to put it in the chat. If you're a Chicago school folk, you're welcome to come to our human trafficking special interest group. We post those announcements in the counselor education advising forum. Joey, go ahead. Let's see, can I?
Yeah, hi. Thank you all. That was a great overview, specifically to training. I was wondering, is there a mandate? I know there's mandated reporting for, and limited confidentiality for other things, but what about for I'm assuming it's in place for trafficking as well, or is that legislation that hasn't, or an ethical aspect from even the ACA that hasn't been actually encoded?
I see Dr. Foster smiling, so I'm going to defer to her.
Yes and no. There's going to be some state-specific stuff, Joey, around that. Some of it will be the age of the person being trafficked. Sometimes it's, there are statutes of limitations with it. It is a real ethical and legal intersection. For instance, I had a client who had been trafficked when she was younger. I did not have to report it in the state of Louisiana because she had already been through the legal system and it had been reported. But because of her age when she was trafficked, had it not, I would have needed to report it. So one of the things you'll need to look at, depending on your individual state, is how does your state define risk? Is it defined as it is in the ACA Code of Ethics? Is it imminent danger? So there's all of those little intricacies. I wish there was just a real clean answer that we should just report every time. But that is not my experience. Dr. E.
But I mean, similar to what you're saying, like you have to look, again, state-specific, law-specific at the ages. So is this a client reporting that they were trafficked as a minor and now they still are a minor? Or are they currently being trafficked, but they are an adult? And then to the level of risk, is this a threat to self or others? So it's not, sadly, it's not, oh, here's the answer. So if you were asking this in a consultation or supervisory session, what we would do is like let's dig in to our state law. Let's dig into the unique aspects of this case, and go through an ethical decision-making model and really show that we're hitting each of those steps, and then moving forward with the action that we decide to take and documenting all of it.
Including but not limited to calling your state board, calling your malpractice insurance, all of those things as well. We have a couple of agencies. I'm part of the Greater New Orleans Trafficking Task Force, and so I might even call them. And so knowing, and there are lots of those types of agencies that you can become involved with that become great collaboration and consultation partners.
Mm-hmm. And don't feel like you have to wait till you're not a student to do that. I'm on the Denver multidisciplinary anti-trafficking, and we've got lots of grad students on the task force. I mean, really, the more, if you think about how sophisticated, as Michael was saying earlier, how sophisticated and pervasive the trafficking systems are, we need to match that as the anti-trafficking efforts to be able to interfere with the trafficker's success. Okay, any final questions? Thanks, Joey. I think we're right about at our time. So thank you all for being here and for your attention and questions and comments. And feel free to reach out to any of us, especially if you'd like to join our group.
Thank you all very much. Most informative, very just such great information. So thank you all. Amazing job, amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you in the next session. Michael, Kevin, good to see you guys.
Always good to see you, Jeff.
I was like, my friends, my brothers from another mother. Good to see you guys. So
Thank you. You know, I think one day we're gonna have maybe a screening tool for human trafficking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Oh, that's so cool.
I would really like to work with some people that are focused on that.
Right, exactly. Well, you know, I mean, here, and of course, every couple of years with the Super Bowl coming to Miami or whatever, you know, we have a relatively high.
Yes.
We have some good resources that are already in place because, I mean, and not doing right or wrong here. Let me make sure I stop this recording as we're doing this.